She was already on a plane home when I opened my eyes. I know that now. At the time, all I knew was the ceiling white tiles, fluorescent light, a slow mechanical beeping somewhere to my left, and a smell like antiseptic and old coffee that told me I was in a hospital before I could remember why. My right hip felt like someone had taken a crowbar to it. My head was wrapped in something. When I tried to lift my left arm, it didn't respond the way arms are supposed to respond. A woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun leaned over me and said something soft in a language I didn't know. She had the kind of eyes that have seen a lot of suffering and decided, quietly, not to add to it. I was in Seville, Spain. My daughter Meredith had planned the trip as a birthday gift, 7 months late, but I hadn't cared. After my wife Carol passed 3 years earlier, and our son Marcus died the year before that, Meredith was all I had left. I was grateful for anything. I had been at the bottom of a stone staircase in our hotel for 2 days before I woke up. She wasn't there. Her husband Dax wasn't there. The note on the side table, which a young nurse named Felipe translated for me in careful, kind English, said she'd had a family emergency back home in Charleston. Said she'd return when I was stable enough to travel. Said she loved me. She sent her love. 3 words, right there on the paper. Those 3 words. I want you to understand something before I go any further. I am not a dramatic man. I spent 36 years building and running a small batch bourbon distillery in the South Carolina Lowcountry, 40 acres. My grandfather Amos cleared himself in 1951, just outside the Ace Basin, where the marsh grass goes silver in the afternoon light, and the air smells like salt and earth simultaneously. I read contracts. I fired crews who cut corners. I buried my wife and my son, and I kept working because the work was what Amos built, and I was not going to be the generation that let it fall. I am not a man who jumps to conclusions, but lying in that hospital bed in Seville with a fractured hip, 3 cracked ribs, and what the doctor gently called a moderate traumatic brain injury, I kept returning to one image. Meredith at the top of the stairs, turned toward me, her hand coming up, and then the contact. Steady, deliberate, not a stumble, not a reflex, a choice. I tried to argue myself out of it. I did. I told myself the brain makes mistakes when it's damaged, that memory is slippery, that my daughter loved me, that she had planned this trip herself, that she had hugged me at the airport. I was working very hard at believing that. Then, on the 5th day, an old woman came to my room. Her name was Consuela. She was maybe 72 years old, small and dense with the arms of someone who had scrubbed floors her whole life. She had a young man with her, her nephew, studying architecture at the university, who spoke careful English and served as her voice. Consuela had been the housekeeper on our floor. She'd been mopping the corridor that morning. She had seen everything. The nephew translated slowly. She says she saw your daughter's hand. She says the report the hotel filed was not accurate. She says she wanted to come sooner, but the manager told her to stay quiet. She says she has a son who has hurt her many times, and she knows the difference between an accident and a decision. I asked her if she would speak to the police. She nodded immediately, without hesitation. Then she reached into the pocket of her cardigan and took out something folded inside a paper napkin. My grandfather's pocket watch. The Hamilton he'd carried every working day of his adult life, that he'd pressed into my father's hand on his deathbed, that my father had pressed into mine when I graduated from Clemson. Consuela had found it on the second landing. She hadn't given it to the manager. She'd kept it safe. I held that watch and I cried in front of 2 strangers in a language I couldn't speak, and it was the most honest thing I'd done in years. I want to stop here for a second, because I know some of you watching this have had a moment like that, a moment where the person who should have protected you was nowhere, and a stranger was. A complete stranger who had nothing to gain and everything to lose just by showing up. If you know that feeling, I want you to know I see you. That loneliness is one of the most specific kinds of pain there is, and the kindness of a stranger in the middle of it doesn't fix anything, but it reminds you that the world still has people worth fighting to stay in. So I stayed, and I started planning. The American consulate sent a liaison named Patricia to see me on day 6. Tall woman, late 30s, dark braid, moved like someone who had spent a lot of time in rooms where things had gone wrong. I told her everything. I didn't soften a single detail. She took notes, asked one question: did I want to file a criminal complaint with the Spanish authorities? And when I said not yet, she didn't push. She just looked at me for a moment. Then she closed her notebook and said her grandmother's savings account had been emptied by her own uncle, and they hadn't known until she passed. I always wondered what she would have done if she'd had time to know, Patricia said. I always wondered if she'd have wanted to choose. Patricia helped me get an emergency travel document. She helped me draft a single email to Meredith, carefully worded, precisely dishonest. I wrote that I was confused, that the doctors were worried about my memory, that I didn't know how I'd manage the distillery when I got home. I wrote that I trusted her completely and needed her help. She responded within 2 hours. "Don't worry about a thing, Daddy. I'll handle everything. Just rest and come home when you can. We love you so much." We, her and Dax, we love you so much. I read that email 4 times. Then I asked Patricia's staff to help me book a different flight, different date, different name, paid from an old account Carol had kept for her sister's medical expenses, just enough for a one-way ticket and a rental car. I landed at Charleston Executive Airport at 6:30 on a Tuesday morning. The air smelled like pluff, mud, and jet fuel and home. I sat in the rental car for 30 seconds and let myself feel it. Just 30 seconds. Then I drove. I didn't go to the distillery first. I drove to a Marriott off I-26, paid cash for 2 nights, and spent 4 hours in the business center printing every email, every text message, every document exchange I'd had with Meredith and Dax over the previous 3 years. Then I drove to a CVS, bought a prepaid phone, and called the name Patricia had given me before I left Seville. His name was Carver Hollingsworth. He was 66 years old, an elder fraud attorney out of a small office on Meeting Street in downtown Charleston, and his secretary tried to schedule me for the following Thursday. I told her my daughter had attempted to murder me in Spain and was currently trying to take my family's distillery. There was a pause long enough to hear her decide something. She told me to come in at 1 o'clock. Carver was a compact man with white hair and the kind of stillness that comes from decades of hearing stories that would flatten most people. He led me to a conference room that smelled like old paper and bourbon, occupational hazard in Charleston, I suppose, and he listened for a full hour without writing a single thing down. When I finished, he asked one question. "Where are the documents?" "She has them." He picked up his phone and called the county recorder directly. 40 minutes later, we had the filings on his screen. A durable power of attorney granting Meredith full control over my finances and property if a licensed physician declared me incapacitated. A deed transfer moving the distillery land and the residence into a revocable trust where she was the sole successor trustee. Both signed with my signature, both notarized. Both executed on a Sunday afternoon 4 months earlier when Dax had sat at my kitchen table making small talk about the Gamecocks, while I signed papers my daughter told me were routine estate planning updates. I hadn't read a single page. Carver took off his glasses and rubbed his face. Then he told me what they'd been planning to do. Bring me home from Spain confused and disoriented. Walk me into a physician who owed Dax a favor. Get an incapacity declaration signed. Activate the power of attorney. Move me into a memory care facility probably within 30 days. Take control of the distillery, the land, the accounts, everything. I sat there in that conference room and I thought about Consuela holding my grandfather's watch in a paper napkin and praying for a stranger. The world contains those 2 kinds of people simultaneously. That is what makes it so hard to navigate. Carver said, "There's more here than fraud. If what you're telling me about Spain is true, we are looking at attempted homicide for financial gain. We have to be very careful, or she and Dax will smell it and disappear." He smiled, then small, slow, precise. "But first, let's revoke everything. Right now, today, before she knows you're on this continent." That afternoon, we revoked the power of attorney with notarized documents. By the next morning, Carver had filed a notice of dispute on the trust transfer freezing any sale or refinance, along with fraud claims against both Meredith and Dax. He also brought in an investigator. Her name was June, mid-50s, silver-cropped hair, moved like she had seen every version of human dishonesty and found it mildly interesting rather than surprising. Carver told her to find out everything about Dax's finances. She called me 3 days later. We met at a diner on James Island. I remember she ordered a BLT and sweet tea, and she slid a manila folder across the table without preamble. Dax had been hiding losses for over 2 years. He was a partner at a small wealth management firm. He didn't earn what he told Meredith he earned. There was a second mortgage on their house in Mount Pleasant taken out in 2023. A margin account he'd overextended. A civil suit from a former client about to go public. A brokerage complaint already quietly filed. As of the previous week, he owed $1.4 million he could not pay. I looked at the spreadsheets. The numbers were very neat. "There's more," June said. She showed me a list of search terms pulled from Meredith's personal accounts through legal subpoena. Searches conducted over the previous 5 months. Power of attorney, elderly parent. Diminished capacity, adult children. Memory care facilities, Charleston, SC. Revocable trust property transfer timeline. And then, near the bottom, average payout accidental death life insurance policy. I have a $1.8 million life insurance policy. I took it out after Marcus died so that if anything ever happened to me, Meredith would be set for life. She was the sole beneficiary. She had known about it since the day I signed it. I sat in that diner and I looked at that search term for a long time. June was watching me. Sir, the trip to Seville. I don't think she ever intended for you to come back from it at all. Honestly, I don't know how to describe what I felt in that moment. It wasn't shock. By then I was past shock. It was something more like the feeling you get when a structural problem you'd been half aware of finally reveals its full scope. The kind of thing where part of you had already known, and now the knowing had a number attached to it. If I'm being honest with you, and I promised myself I would be, I also felt grief. Not for what she'd done, for the girl I'd raised. For the person she'd been before, Dax in debt and desperation had rearranged her into someone I didn't recognize. I don't say that to excuse her. I say it because I want you to understand that when I finally faced her, I wasn't standing there as a man who hated his daughter. I was standing there as a man who had loved his daughter deeply enough to survive what she did to him. I want to sit with you here for a moment, because I know some of you watching this right now have a Dax in your life. A partner, a sibling, a child who has slowly replaced the person you knew with someone who measures every room they walk into for what it's worth. And you've been telling yourself you're imagining it, that you're being unkind. That loyalty means giving people the benefit of the doubt indefinitely. I want to tell you gently. Loyalty is not the same as willful blindness. You can love someone and also see them clearly. In fact, the only love worth anything requires it. The toxicology report came back from Seville 2 weeks before the court hearing. Trace amounts of zolpidem in my blood work from the morning of the fall, a prescription sleep aid. I had never been prescribed it. I had never taken it. The dosage was consistent with a single oral administration within 90 minutes of when I'd drunk the coffee Meredith brought to my room. She had drugged me. Then she had walked me to the top of those stairs. The morning of the hearing, I drove to the distillery instead of the courthouse. Carver was downtown handling the paperwork and emergency restraining order based on the toxicology report. We had agreed I wouldn't appear in court. I would be where she expected me to be, at home, incapacitated. I parked at the gate and I walked the property slowly with my cane. The spring barley was just coming in on the east field, pale gold at the tips. The distillery building stone foundation my grandfather laid himself. Cedar addition my father built in 1979. The copperpot stills I'd installed in 2002 looked exactly the way it always looked in early morning light, like something that had decided to stay. I walked down to the creek where Amos used to fish on Sunday mornings, and I sat on the old cypress bench he'd made, and I put my hand on the wood. I'm keeping it, I told him. Not for me, for you, and for whoever comes after Renee. Renee is my granddaughter. She's 6 years old. She has Carol's eyes and a laugh that sounds like a screen door in summer. If I had died on those stairs in Seville, Meredith would have raised her. And Renee would have grown up watching her mother look at people and calculate their usefulness. I could not let that be the lesson that shaped her. So I got up, and I walked back to the oak tree my grandfather planted the year he bought the land. And I waited. She arrived at noon, black SUV. She had Dax with her, and a lawyer I didn't recognize. She was wearing dark clothes, like she was already dressed for a closing. She had a folder under her arm and a key in her hand, and she walked up the gravel path toward the distillery with the particular energy of a person who believes they are arriving at something that already belongs to them. She didn't see me at first. I stood up from the bench under the oak tree. Meredith. The way her face moved in the next 2 seconds, I will carry that with me for the rest of my life. First came the shock, a full-body flinch, like she'd touched something she thought was cold and found it hot. Then came the automatic smile, the one she'd learned as a child when she needed to regroup. Then confusion. Then, for just a moment, something that was very clearly fear. And then she landed on a kind of bright, frantic warmth that I recognized as performance. Daddy, oh my God, you're here. When did you get back? Why didn't you call me? I didn't move. I got back 2 months ago, sweetheart. Dax stopped walking. The lawyer's face went carefully blank in the way lawyers' faces do when they understand the room has just fundamentally changed. She started talking fast. She moved toward me. She said something about the hospital in Seville, about how worried she'd been, about how she'd been trying to reach me. I let her talk. I stood there under the oak tree with my grandfather's watch on my wrist and a glass of this year's early batch of bourbon in my hand, and I let her fill the silence with everything she had. Then I said gently, Meredith, I need you to know something before anything else happens. I need you to know that I love you. That I have loved you every day of your life. That nothing changes that, not even what you did. She stopped. I have a court order being served at your house in Mount Pleasant right now. There is a restraining order on this property. There are fraud charges filed against both of you. There is, as of this morning, an open attempted homicide investigation in 2 countries. And I have a witness from the hotel in Seville. I have toxicology showing zolpidem in my coffee the morning I fell. I have your search history. I have Dax's financial records. I have everything. She began to cry. Not a performance, I want to be honest about that. Real tears. Her hands came up and she started crying the way people cry when the structure they built their entire plan on collapses at once. Daddy, please, whatever they told you, watch your step. I need you to watch your... She stopped. She heard it. What she'd said. I watched her hear it. Watch your step. Those are the words you said to me at the top of those stairs in Seville right before you put your hand on my back. Do you remember? She did. I could see her remember. Her face went still in a way that reminded me of Marcus. God forgive me. It reminded me of my son's face the morning we found him, that particular stillness that means someone is somewhere you can no longer reach. I didn't yell. I didn't move toward her. I sat back down on the bench. I picked up my glass. You need to leave the property now. There is a sheriff at the gate who has been here since 11. He let you come up the path because I asked him to. He will escort you out. She went to her knees on the gravel. I have heard a great deal of crying in my life at funerals, in hospitals, the morning my son died, the afternoon Carol got her diagnosis. I have never heard a sound like what came out of my daughter on that gravel path. It came from somewhere structural, like something load-bearing giving way. Dax stood perfectly still. Her lawyer was already on his phone, voice low and fast. I drank my bourbon. I want you to understand the truth of that moment, because I think people imagine revenge to be satisfying in a clean, cinematic way. It isn't. What I felt sitting there was not triumph. It was something much quieter and much sadder. It was the death of a particular version of my life, the version where my daughter and I grew old together, where she brought Rennie to the distillery every summer, where I got to watch her become someone I was proud of. I was sitting at the burial of all of that, and the love didn't leave. That's what people never believe when I tell them. The love stayed exactly where it always was. What died was the trust. And you can love someone without trust, but you cannot be safe with them, and you cannot build anything real, and eventually you have to let go of what you built together, even while the love sits there in your chest, permanent and useless. She was arrested at her home that evening. Federal charges followed within 2 weeks once the toxicology report and Consuela's notarized statement were formally filed. Dax was arrested 4 days later on his own counts. The civil suits against him broke publicly the same week. The trial took 16 months. I won't walk you through every session. There were days I want to forget entirely, the day her lawyer suggested I had a history of balance problems and had fabricated the push. The day they brought up Marcus's death and tried to suggest grief had made me unreliable. The day Consuela flew in from Seville, at the consulate's expense, to testify, and I saw her in the courthouse hallway in her good black cardigan, and she held my face in both her hands and said in careful English, "You alive. God is good." I wept standing in a public hallway, and I am not ashamed of it. Meredith took a plea. 11 years for attempted homicide and elder financial fraud, with parole consideration at 7. Dax took a separate plea, 8 years on fraud and conspiracy charges. They divorced from inside their respective facilities. Rennie went to live with Dax's older sister, a woman named Paulette who cried every day of the trial and who has been, in every way that matters, exactly the kind of person Rennie deserved to be raised by. I see Rennie twice a month. She calls me Pop on Sunday mornings. She knows her mama is somewhere far away thinking about things she did wrong. She doesn't know more than that. Not yet. Someday I will have to tell her the whole truth. I think about how to do that most nights. I haven't figured it out. I'm not sure there is a right way. The distillery is mine. It always was. The trust transfer was set aside. The power of attorney was permanently revoked. The 2025 batch has been the best in a decade. Something about that particular combination of heat and rain in the Ace Basin. I bottled a small reserve run and labeled it Consuela's Reserve. I shipped 6 bottles to Seville with a letter. She wrote back in Spanish. Her grandson translated. She said her son had been sober for almost a year. She said she prayed for me each evening before dinner. She said the bourbon was the finest thing she'd ever tasted, which I don't entirely believe but which I treasure nonetheless. The hip never fully healed. I use the cane in wet weather, which in the South Carolina Lowcountry means I use it often. The brain injury left me with a thing where I lose words mid-sentence, like a signal dropping. But I run my distillery. I read every contract. I sit on the cypress bench by the creek most evenings, and I watch the light change over the marsh until the sky goes that particular orange-purple that only happens here. People ask if I'm happy. I tell them no. Happy belongs to the time before. The word I have now is grounded. I am a grounded man, standing on land that is mine, listening to his granddaughter laugh over the phone on Sunday mornings. I don't hate Meredith. I haven't visited her. Her attorney sent a letter 8 months in. She wanted to apologize. She wanted to tell me she loved me. I read it twice in the same chair where I'd signed those documents without reading them. Then I put it in the fireplace. Some apologies are just the opening move in a game that never ends. I am done playing. Here is what I want to leave you with. Because I didn't come here to simply tell you a story. I came here because I think some of you recognize something in it. The first lesson is the hardest. Your signature is not a formality. I signed documents I did not read because I trusted the hand that offered them. I was not stupid. I was not old. I was not failing. I was a man who loved his daughter and had decided that love was sufficient protection. It was not. Read everything. Hire your own attorney, not one recommended by the person asking you to sign. If someone calls estate documents routine while making small talk to distract you, that is not routine. That is a stage performance, and you are the mark. The second lesson: goodness is not armor. I spent 60 years being a decent, generous, present human being. None of that protected me when the person who wanted what I had decided to take it. What protected me was a hotel maid who refused to look away, an attorney who read slowly, an investigator who ordered a BLT and slid a folder across a table without drama. Goodness brought those people to me. But clear thinking, cold, methodical, patient clear thinking is what brought me home. The third lesson, and this one is personal. Breaking is not failing. I broke on the flight home. I broke in the parking lot of a gas station off I-26. I broke in a courthouse hallway when an old Spanish woman held my face in her hands. I broke, and then the next morning I drank my coffee and I made the next call and I drove to the next appointment. Strength is not the absence of shattering. It is what you do with your hands the morning after you've shattered. If any part of this story sounds familiar to your own life right now, if there's a document you haven't read, a person you've been making excuses for, a feeling in your gut you keep filing away, please listen to that feeling. It is not paranoia. It is not ingratitude. It is your own mind trying to protect you from what your heart is too loyal to admit. Get a lawyer who answers only to you. Get copies of everything that bears your name. Tell a neighbor. Tell a friend. You are not being dramatic. You are being a person who deserves to stand on their own land as a free person. That is what Amos built this place for, so that the people who loved it could stand on it and not be moved. I almost lost it. I came back. So can you. Before I go, I want to ask you something. If you were in his position, if you had done everything he did, waited as long as he waited, held yourself as steady as he held himself, would you have walked to that oak tree? Drop a 1 inch the comments if yes, a 2 if you think you would have broken and confronted her earlier, and a 3 if you honestly don't know. I read every comment. I genuinely do. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love knowing how far this reaches. If something in this story touched something in your own life, say so below. You won't be judged. You'll be seen. If this story stayed with you, please subscribe. New stories here every week about real people, real choices, real consequences, and the complicated grace of surviving the people who were supposed to love us best. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Charleston, South Carolina to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is entirely coincidental.